Welcome to Exploring Hobbies. The host is Jamie Fouché, and the guests, Bernhard Muller and Robert Clausa, are going to talk about audiophiles.
Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Very welcome.
So I'm really excited to hear all about what you've got to share. First, let's start out with please explain to everybody what an audiophile is.
Well, the audiophile is basically someone who likes sounds, who likes to listen to sounds, music or theater sounds. But there are a variety of different ways of implementing that. One way is by building a stereo system.
Okay.
Another way might be
Buying a stereo system.
or even buying a stereo system and not listening to it, but showing it off to your friends because it's so great.
All right. All of which would fall into becoming an audiophile then.
Sure.
All right.
Right.
How did you get started?
Well, long story, I'll try and make it really short. In 1940, about the time, just a little after I was born, my father decided that he would do the equivalent of buy a video camera. They didn't exist in those days. So they had recording devices that were able to cut on 78 RPM records the sounds of people's voices and play them back. And so I've got recordings of myself going goo goo gaga gaga all the way up, to somewhat older. Well, a few years later, when I was about 5 or 6, I had learned how to run this thing, and my dad had a couple of 78s of symphonies and classical music, basically, some Sousa marches as well, and I enjoyed listening to those. And until I was about 12 years old, I listened to this. It was a Silvertone, was the brand name of this thing. And when I was about 12, I became aware that there were people who had something called LPs. And I was bound and determined I was going to have an LP player. So I pestered my dad no end, and he finally bought me one. He thought that the old Silvertones sounded better than the LPs. So we did an experiment. He sat in the living room, and I sat in the kitchen with the two record players, and we compared them, only he didn't know. Now, I couldn't play the same piece of music on both machines, but that's okay. He came to agree, yes, the LP did sound better than the 78s. Well, from then it went on to stereo came in. I felt I had to have something, and I couldn't afford to buy another stereo thing, so I taught myself. I bought a Heathkit, basically. And from Heathkits, I developed some further interests, and eventually I got to building my own equipment, so that by the time we were in the early 70s, virtually all the electronics in my system were home built, solder and wire and stuff. And I carried this into college, where I actually earned a little bit of pocket money by building stereos and Heathkits and other things for folks.
And were most of them then for people to listen to
Yes.
manufactured, like records from, recording artists, that sort of thing? Or
Yeah,
were they for them to record their own
No. These were
pieces?
things for people to listen to
play
records,
on.
to
Okay.
tapes
Playback
or
only.
records and stuff.
Playback only.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Great. And how did you get started?
Well, I got started in hi-fi by listening to AM radio. And this I know is ironic because AM radio is probably the lowest, is even worse than the worst MP3 today. But I had an AM table radio, and I listened to rock songs, Elvis Presley and things like that when I was growing up and going to grade school while doing homework. Now, when FM came about, all of a sudden there was a quantum leap of quality. No static noise during thunderstorms, lightning, a broader frequency spectrum. AM is only good from 50 hertz to, say, 6 kilohertz, and now not even that, maybe 3 or 4 kilohertz. FM was 50 to 15,000 hertz, and a signal-to-noise ratio, instead of 35 or 40 dB, it was like 60 dB. And so there was, again, this quantum leap of quality, and the distortion was also quite low compared to AM. due to the mechanics of generating the radio waves to send it to you. Well, being so interested in it, when I was in high school, I went to a store called Alma's Hi-Fi Stereo in Dearborn on Michigan Avenue and asked them for a job. And they gave me a part-time position working, mostly stacking boxes in the warehouse, but they actually found out that I did construct Heath kits such as Burn, the meters and the stereos and speakers and stuff like that. And they said, gee, he can actually service this stuff. So I was a service technician and an installation technician for hi-fi equipment when I was 15.
Wow.
And then worked there for a couple of years until I went to college. And then in college, I started into radio broadcasting at WDET FM, Wayne State University, and obtained an FCC first class radio telephone license so I could actually operate transmitting machinery, transmitting equipment, transmitters and receivers.
Now, Alma sold Bozak, didn't they?
Oh, Alma's absolutely sold Bozak. And during my tenure there, they invited various heads of industry, such as Dr. Rudy Bozak, and he gave a seminar on his speakers at that store. And I met Mr. Bozak.
The reason I'm asking is because I bought a Bozak speaker at Alma's in 1966. Were you working there then?
Absolutely.
Well, your
So I might have bought
paths
it for you.
crossed.
Well, I started there in late '65,
Okay.
between just around Thanksgiving time, 1965, and worked there through August '67.
Okay. So I clearly
Yeah.
you were there.
And Dr. Bozak did visit the store. He gave his presentations, and it won me over because I bought Bozak speakers too. And that was my beginning launch into the industry. However, the association with people that came to the store, for example, many engineers and managers from Ford Motor Company, which was just 1 mile down the road, the glass house. We also had people from Motown and other recording studios come there for microphones, connectors, cables, speakers, and so forth. And that's really where I got my feet firmly planted in the art and earning money doing it and having fun doing it. It was great.
I've got to bring something up about Bozaks.
Yes.
I was lusting after Bozaks, okay, because they were the thing. So my wife and I got married in '66, and she's a wonderful woman, and her wedding gift to me was a Bozak speakers.
Oh, wow.
And we bought the Bozak speakers, but we only bought it with one woofer and one pair of tweeters.
Yes.
And you could add. So for the next 3 wedding anniversaries, she gave me additional speakers to fill out this Bozak box.
Great story. Great story.
My wife says that I enjoyed getting the Bozak speakers more than I enjoyed getting a wife. I'm not so sure if I agree with that, but that's what she
Well, at any rate, she clearly wanted to make you happy and
She
got the idea
and
that
she
you were
succeeded.
you
Yeah,
were
absolutely.
excited about this. I've heard you already mention a number of different types of things, from building equipment to speakers. It sounds like there's a number of different areas that audiophiles can get into. Can you explain to a little bit about the different areas of interest?
Absolutely. Some audiophiles, as Burns say, they buy the $100,000 amplifiers that are gold-plated and are just gorgeous pieces of art to look at. They don't sound any different than your $200 stereo receiver from a big box store.
But they look pretty.
But they look spectacular. And everybody knows this is expensive. But the sound, unless it's broke, it's the same. And we've determined that through scientific means. Now, there are other audiophiles that love recording symphony performances, love recording rock bands, love recording spoken word. I also had my own recording service when I was in college, where I would go out to places and record symphonies, go to Ford Auditorium or churches and record choral performances around Christmas time, lugging around hundreds of pounds of tape recording equipment. Now you can do the same thing with about the size of a pack of cigarettes. But And also, the advances in speaker technology have been tremendous. And there are some audiophiles that specialize in subwoofers, like infinite baffle subwoofers. I have to mention a website. It's called The Cult of the Infinitely Baffled. And you say, boy,
Okay.
this is kind of strange, right? Well, no. Here's a subwoofer. It's 12 inches in diameter, and the excursion goes about a good, plus or minus half an inch, maybe more.
Why is that important?
Well, it turns out that if you take the laws of physics, if you get a book like Baranak's Acoustics, right here, this book has all the physics formulas that take the diameter of the piston, the length of the excursion, and if you blend in the frequency and the power, you get the sound output. The lower in frequencies you want to go, the more displacement you need to get a suitable, listenable sound pressure level that you can hear. And like in hot rods and dragsters, there's no replacement for displacement. You displace air by moving the cones back and forth. Now, some people say, well, gee, I like a fast woofer. Well, no, you don't get a fast woofer. You just get a woofer with no bass. Here's a fast speaker. This is a little tweeter. This is a Audex TW51A. You could buy these for about $3 each at one point in time, 20, 30 years ago. These have been used in high class automobile sound systems like the Ford JBL system, the Chrysler Infiniti system, this exact same speaker. Now, it may be just a portion of it, like this part here, in a different flange for mounting, but it's the same speaker. There's a little, but the thing is though, this thing, if you put 15 watts of power into it, it'll survive for a while, but then it'll go poof, and you have to buy a new one. But at $3 a piece, who cares? Now this guy here, bigger magnet compared to that, has more output, can take more power longer, and can give you more loudness. There's another tweeter that is a dome tweeter, and this is actually a soft dome tweeter. You can actually displace it a little bit. This is a premium, high-priced speaker. These go for about $100 a piece now, and have very smooth response, and they have a little wave guide here to control the dispersion. And controlling dispersion in speakers is very, very important in home theater applications, and we can get into that later. Now this, you say, wow, that's an interesting device. This is a JBL Professional tweeter. This Audex, by the way, is owned by JBL International, excuse me. But this guy here, this is used in theater systems. And if you want to use this in a home theater system, you can knock your socks off with
Would a traveling
DBSBR.
rock band have something like that in there?
Tons of them, yes, absolutely. Traveling rock bands use these all the time. Now, price, $3, $13, $100, $400. That's the relative price ranges of just this one type of speaker. This guy here goes for about $125 to $150 on the open market. So that's the kind of price ranges that you're talking about. But that's the individual component, not the speaker itself.
This is a 12-inch, right?
That's a 12-inch, yes.
So go ahead.
Just as a little addendum to the, what do audiophiles do? As an audiophile, I've kind of modulated what I do. Way back when I started seriously doing this in the 50s, to buy a good amplifier, power amplifier, was very expensive. And so most of my energy and effort was devoted to soldering and designing and building the electronics. As time has gone on, electronics have become very, very good and relatively inexpensive, and it really is a waste of time for me to spend my time designing electronics, frankly. And so you kind of go from, I also designed and built tone arms and turntables when we were doing LPs. Again, we don't use LPs anymore. Now we use DVDs and Blu-ray discs and so forth and so on. So my whole thing has shifted from building electronics to building loudspeakers. This kind of stuff. Just to give you an idea, this is a loudspeaker that I'm currently using in my living room. I built this from scratch. The inside of it looks like this. These two speakers are the same size as this one. And these guys are in the category of some of those that he was talking about.
Did you build the bases too,
I
or
built
did you have
everything
those?
from scratch.
They look like furniture. They're
Well,
really beautiful.
they're
Not to be hidden, to be seen.
That's
They're
right.
really nice.
No, exactly. And so I had to learn, in order to build these, I had to learn how to do veneering. I had to learn how to do gluing. I had to borrow somebody's wood shop. So, and one of the other things that we like to do is generate low bass. I also have a home theater, like Bob does. And when you're watching Jurassic Park and the dinosaurs are going clumping, you'd like to have the floor shake a little bit. I also, being a classical music fan, am interested in organ music. And the organ can go down to 16 hertz. And there virtually are no commercial loudspeakers out there that you can buy for any amount of money that'll do that adequately. So you pretty much have to build your own. So I have 3 of these standing around in my room. They look like this. The loudspeaker that's inside here is actually 18 inches in diameter, has at least this much movement. But there's 2 of them inside this box. And because this is a fairly small box with 2 large loudspeakers in there, it takes a lot of power to drive. I have 3 2,000 watt amplifiers that drive these subwoofers. And as a consequence, when the dinosaur moves, your house jumps. Now, I think I have it done adequately. But my friend Bob here goes even further, and he can talk about that later if he wants to.
Okay.
So anyway, so we, in our hobby, modulate things. Now, one thing that's happened to me about 20 years ago, it started, I restarted playing my violin. I play in 2 different orchestras. I play in 3 different string quartets. As a consequence, I listen to music much less than I ever did. I play it all the time. So why am I interested? Well, it's modified now into the home theater. I like to watch Jurassic Park and things of that sort.
I do too.
As a consequence, my sound system now, 90% of the time, doesn't play music. It plays theater stuff. Again, evolution, if you will.
All right. Has the media format changed? So that change from LPs to cassette to digital, has that made a change on the kind of equipment that you use to listen
Dramatically, very dramatically. AM radio, like I said, had a very narrow bandwidth. FM radio stations have a wider bandwidth. LPs have a wide bandwidth and reasonable signal-to-noise ratio, but by the time you get to a CD, the bandwidth is essentially DC to 22 kilohertz with a 90 plus dB signal-to-noise ratio and distortion that is absolutely vanishing, 0.00, how many numbers you want, percent distortion. Unobtainable in analog. Digital, piece of cake.
So all those people who argue that it's not the same are not necessarily accurate on that.
Oh, it's not the same.
I mean, it's not the same,
It's
but
not the same.
it's not a quality thing where the
No.
LPs were that much
In
better.
fact, there was I would go to the consumer electronics shows in Chicago when they were there and Las Vegas. And when the CD first came out, this one company was demonstrating their systems, and they played this one CD that was made from an analog recording. And they said, see how awful that sounds? You can hear these noises and this distortion and all that. And my engineer friend and I looked at each other and said, it's an analog master. No wonder it's defective.
Yeah.
It wasn't done right. Whereas today with digital recording that can fit in your pocket literally and then a couple of good studio microphones like this, you can record essentially as much frequency range and dynamic range as is capable that your ear can hear. With 24-bit 96 kilohertz sampling rate resolution, you can essentially get it all and record it faithfully. And with these infinite baffle subwoofers that now go down below 20 hertz, down to 16, 10, or even 5 hertz, when the dinosaur puts down its foot, you feel that the dinosaur has put your foot in your living room floor.
Sure.
The house shakes, and that's half the fun.
There you go.
If I can just one interesting thing, and I want to get into that with this box in just a moment. When a $100,000 piece of stereo equipment is playing, or one with tubes that many people like and talk about is playing, within its limitations, and when a modern $300 stereo thing is playing within its limitations, it's demonstrable that they sound the same. Okay, that's easily. The problem arises when you overload them or you push them too far. Then they begin to behave differently. And people who like tubes, for instance, say, oh, I like the sound of a tube misbehaving. Okay? All right. One approach to thinking about that is to say, well, okay, now you're no longer reproducing the sound exactly as it was. You're reproducing it in some different way. You might like it, and I suppose that's legitimate. But for the rest of us, we prefer to have it sound exactly the way it sounded originally, or exactly the way the sound engineer engineered it at the console. Now, the other way of thinking about that is, and I think Bob will agree with me, I design my equipment so that it never goes into overload. I have enough safety factor in everything that it simply always works without overloading, without showing any signs of distress. So I'm generally always reproducing something exactly the way it was recorded or engineered. Again, if like this loudspeaker here that I built myself, to get the furniture quality, to get the sound quality, I know I've seen speakers in the $2,000 or $3,000 range that probably aren't even as good as these. How much money do I have in these? A couple $100, plus a lot of back-breaking labor, of course. But it's possible to get very, very expensive quality if you learn something, you put in a little bit of your own effort and do your own work. One of the things that I did that completely changed the hobby for me, almost 40 years ago, 40 years ago next year, as a matter of fact, I put an ad in the newspaper that said, hey, anybody else in the Detroit Ann Arbor area who's interested in building hi-fi stuff, please give me a call. Well, one of the people that responded was Bob, and ultimately 100 others. And we started a club called SMWTMS, Southeastern Michigan Woofer and Tweeter Marching Society.
Right.
And we've been meeting every 2 months for almost 40 years.
That's wonderful.
Our meetings, there's our meeting notice. Our meetings are, if you type in SMWTMS on YouTube, you will get the meetings on YouTube. The last 3 or 4 years, all of our meetings have been recorded and are there. One of the things that came out of this meeting many years ago, we got to fighting about exactly, do tubes sound better than transistors? And being science-minded people, we built equipment. This is the famous ABX comparator. 6 of us in the club got together, designed and built this thing, ultimately sold a bunch of them to major manufacturers and major recording studios and auto companies and stuff. And the whole purpose of all of this stuff is to present equipment A and equipment B, let you listen to them as long as you like, and then it will present you with X, which you don't know. It's either A or B, but you don't know which it is.
Okay.
You listen to it as long as you want to, and then you write down what you think it is. After doing a series of trials, 16 or 20 or 25, taken over a day, a week, a year, however you want to do it, you then, when you're done, you ask the machine, what was it I listened to, and you compare your answers. And when you're comparing tubes and transistors that are properly designed and are not driven beyond their capability, nobody gets them all
No
right.
one can tell them apart.
Nobody
Not
can tell them
consistently,
apart.
anyway.
Not consistent.
In fact, most of the time, the score is less than 50% correct.
Yeah.
And literally, there's like loudspeaker wires is another thing that people can spend possibly thousands of dollars on. And basically, there's no difference that you can tell if you do it double blind under these conditions. And I was part and parcel of some of these tests, and you would sweat blood trying to hear the differences between these two. And when you knew A was A and when you knew B was B,
It was easy to hear the
it was just completely, one was awful and the other was beautiful. And then you went to the X and then you sweated. Can I hear the difference? Can I hear the difference? And you got down the 16 trials and literally you were sweating trying to hear the difference. And when you get done, you get 40% correct. And so you have these multi-$1,000 speaker cables being compared to Radio Shack line cord for $1 or $2. And suddenly, the emperor has no clothes. And this debunked numbers of high-end speaker cable companies. And they were just distraught because when they tried, they even bought some of these and
To see for themselves?
Did it themselves. And all of a sudden, they were quiet.
Got it.
But they introduced different colors, though.
They had to bring something out to the market.
Right.
Again, if you're this is another end of the, I mean, we're perhaps one end of the hobby. The other end of the hobby is, okay, so I spent $100,000 on something that I can't hear the difference. It's beautiful, and I can show it off to my neighbors like I show off my Rolls Royce. Now, and Rolls Royce doesn't drive any better than your Chrysler, but it's a Rolls Royce after all.
Status
So you
symbol.
can, exactly. So if you want, if you're into that, that's fine. That's fine. Just don't tell me it sounds better because it doesn't.
So what other things do you do in a club? And are there other clubs besides yours in the area?
There are, although I don't belong to any of them, and I can't really tell you. Go ahead.
There were a couple of other clubs available. One listened to records, LPs. That was their specialty. And then another, there's one out of Ford Motor Company
Yes.
employees that meet and talk about things like that. Really, there's another group called the Audio Engineering Society Detroit section. And the AES, I've been a member for 42 years now, a full member, read all the journals and kind of thing, through my entire career, has brought together, and I brought together the AES Detroit section with Earl Geddes, David Clark, Charles Nairn, myself, and a few others to get that part of the Professional Audio Society together. And some of these people, for example, if you're going to be going into home theater, I would suggest reading this book here, Premium Home Theater by Dr. Earl Geddes. Very valuable for audio. The book's about 10 years old, so the video stuff is maybe a little bit, only goes up to 720p, but the audio stuff is still, the laws of physics do not change. If you're into the sound reproduction, I strongly urge you to get Floyd Toole's book, Dr. Floyd Toole, Sound Reproduction, Loudspeakers and Rooms. This is a master handbook. If you read this cover to cover, you'll know more than me.
Okay.
The others, If you're into acoustics for home and studio, if you want to do recording in your home, this is a good one by F. Alton Everest. We already mentioned the Baranic Acoustics book, and then Jurgi's Sound, Noise, and Vibration Control to keep out noises out of your room. That goes into various construction techniques that you can use to isolate your theater from everybody else and vice versa.
Excellent. Well, those all sound like really good resources to get someone
Absolutely.
started.
Yes.
And then, of course, they can look up your club, I'm assuming, and it sounds
Absolutely.
like you're on YouTube. You want to give us the, you've got a website?
Yeah. You want to?
If you are interested in becoming a Smootums member, the website is http://www.provide.net/djcarlst/smwtms.htm.
All right, and we can put a copy of that up so that people can get that easy.
Or just search Smootums on Google.
SMWTMS on Google gets you there every
Yeah.
time.
Right.
Excellent.
Nothing
Well,
else is SMWTMS.
Robert and Bern, it has been really interesting hearing everything about audiophiles and what you guys do. I would love to come here, watch Jurassic Park in one of your home theaters
Okay,
sometime.
you're welcome
I am
to do
sure
that.
that is quite an experience. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Very welcome.
You're very welcome.
Thank you all for joining us today. Please look for future episodes of Exploring Hobbies.